What boss fights can you actually skip inside of Mario Odyssey? Even though the question seems simple, the answer actually includes some game-breaking techniques that you might not have seen before. So we're going to try and analyze every boss fight in the game, including those in Dark Side, and go to the extreme to see which are actually required to play through the whole game. Because a little bit of spoilers, even though there's 25 boss fights in the game, you aren't even required to play half of them. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. There are some boss fights that are really easy to skip, so let's get those out of the way first. Generally, to progress through Mario Odyssey, you want to collect power moons. Each one you collect fills up this bar at the top left, and once you fill the bar all the way up, you can put the power moons into the Odyssey and leave the kingdom. If you're playing through Mario Odyssey normally, it's usually worth your time to do most of the boss fights, because defeating them gives you a multi-moon. And since a multi-moon is worth 3 regular power moons, it gets you that much closer to powering up the Odyssey. But because Mario Odyssey is an open world game, as in it lets you roam through the whole entire map freely, you can, with small exceptions, collect whatever moons you want in whatever order you want. So, if there were a bunch of extra moons in the kingdom, like you see here, you could hypothetically ignore the boss fight, collect the other moons, and leave in basically the exact same way. For example, in Sand Kingdom, you can easily skip the Harriet and Necrotech boss fights since there's about 40 other power moons in the kingdom, or pre-peace moons, and you only actually need 16 to activate the Odyssey. So getting any 16 of these moons is a perfectly viable method to just leave the kingdom and go on with the rest of the game. But weirdly, this situation fits a lot more kingdoms than you would think. Light Kingdom is right after and follows with a requirement of 8 power moons to leave the kingdom and has 19 pre-peace moons, meaning that you can skip the Rango boss fight. Right after we have Wooded Kingdom, and that needs 16 moons to leave. And since there's 23 pre-peace moons, you can power the Odyssey early here too to skip the Spear and Torque Drift boss fights. If you follow this formula for all of the applicable kingdoms, you, without any special tricks, can easily skip 10 of the 25 total boss fights in Super Mario Odyssey, leaving 15 boss fights left. Now, that's still a lot of boss fights, but I did say that these were boss fights that you couldn't skip without special tricks. There are some game-breaking glitches that let us skip a few, so let's go through these one by one. So let's start with the first boss fight you come across in Mario Odyssey. Let's start with Topper and Cap Kingdom. Which is funny, let me get sidetracked for like 2 seconds. You know when sometimes you take a test in school, look at the first question, and know you're just completely cooked? Well, Mario Odyssey is that test, because the first boss fight in the game actually cannot be skipped because of one crucial thing. This wire right here. Like we were talking about before, most kingdoms have a minimum amount of power moons you need to leave the kingdom and advance in the game. But in Cap Kingdom, there's no amount of power moons you can put into the Odyssey before leaving the kingdom. The only way you could get to Cascade is through this wire that can only spawn after beating this Topper boss fight. There's no tricks, no glitches, you simply cannot get to this wire without fighting Topper. So unfortunately, the first boss fight is a required boss fight. But the same might not be easily said for the second boss fight, this being Madame Brutal and Cascade. Unlike Cap Kingdom, Cascade Kingdom does have a minimum moon requirement for leaving the kingdom, that being 5 power moons. And lucky for us, there are a good amount of moons that we can collect here in Cascade. We can easily get 1 moon by breaking this rock right here with the Chain Chomp, called our first power moon. And then there's another moon basically just like it later on into the kingdom. Again, you break a rock with the Chain Chomp and get another power moon. And there's one more easy moon that you can get hidden away in this 2D section. You go across the big tunnel and then there's a power moon just right there. And that's it. We have 3 out of the 5 power moons, which unfortunately isn't enough to leave the kingdom. It seems like the developers really wanted the first few boss fights to be required so that you can get a feel for them early on, because the rest of the power moons are pretty locked away in this kingdom. There's only 2 other moons that even spawn at this point, which, if they were accessible, would let us leave the kingdom early. Treasure of the Waterfall Basin is a moon that's hidden in this treasure chest right here, but it's blocked off until you beat the boss fight. And Secret Path to Fossil Falls is this moon on the island in the sky, which is supposed to be collected through this painting unlocked later in the game. Again, if we were able to get to these 2 moons, we'd be able to hypothetically leave the kingdom. Well, as it turns out, there was actually an easy way to get Mario to the treasure chest room. It's actually hilarious how conveniently placed this glitch is, but I kid you not, people found out you can get into the treasure chest area by literally just ground pounding over this patch of grass over the room. And once you're in, you just open the chest and grab the moon as normal, giving us 4 out of 5 total moons. All we needed left was some way to pick up the moon on the island in the sky. And even though there's not much we can work with, there was one thing we could use, that being this checkpoint. In Mario Odyssey, checkpoints allow you to fast travel from one point to another in various kingdoms, so if we were able to activate this checkpoint, we could easily fast travel to it. And somehow, people found a way to do it without any glitches, and that's by using everyone's favorite and totally not broken mode, the 2-player mode. Two-player mode allows Cappy and Mario to be controlled independently of one another. And a weird add-on to this mode is the fact that Cappy isn't affected by gravity the same way that Mario is. And so, people found a way to abuse that. With the precise jump off of the skull in the Cascade Kingdom, you can throw Cappy upwards and give Cappy just enough height to glide over to reach the island. Of course, that's a visual to show you what's going on, but the actual gameplay looks like this. Yeah, the camera always focuses on Mario, so getting up here is a lot harder than it actually looks. But once you get Cappy onto the island, you can switch to one-player mode and activate the checkpoint. And by warping to the checkpoint, collecting the last moon, and inserting all 5 moons into the Odyssey, we can successfully power it up, meaning that Midday and Brutal can be skipped, which lowers the total down to 14 required boss fights. But the next boss fight was gonna get even crazier. That boss fight is the Mecha Wiggler. If you looked closely, you might have seen that I marked 2D Donkey Kong as an easy boss fight to skip earlier, which seems strange. Both of these boss fights are in the same kingdom, so if one of them can be skipped, it seems like both of them should be skipped. But that isn't the case because they take place in 2 different versions of Metro Kingdom. Night Metro for the Mecha Wiggler, and Day Metro for 2D DK. And that's important because when you fly into Metro Kingdom for the first time, you're put into Night Metro while the Mecha Wiggler terrorizes the city. And once you defeat it, you unlock Day Metro, where the 2D DK fight is. Now, keep that in mind, because to leave Metro Kingdom for either Day or Night Metro, you need a total of 20 power moons. And in Day Metro, that's easy enough to do, with a whopping 43 other available power moons. Any 20 of those, and you can insert them into the Odyssey and call it a day, proving that you can easily skip the 2D DK fight. But in Night Metro, you can only collect a grand total of 5 power moons, 15 short of the moons needed to leave the kingdom. And unfortunately, this wasn't a situation like Cascade Kingdom, where there were moons available that were supposed to be inaccessible. Those 5 moons are the only moons that actually exist, with the rest of the moons needed only being found in Day Metro after defeating the Mecha Wiggler. And to this day, there's no way to collect all 20 moons in Night Metro. Because to successfully skip Night Metro, people found a way to access Day Metro early. Now, it's true, when you fly into Metro Kingdom for the first time, you're immediately put into Night Metro. But if you warp to Metro Kingdom through the painting in Sand Kingdom, then you're actually able to see Metro Kingdom before the Mecha Wiggler is there, or Day Metro. But from there, you're completely separated from the rest of the kingdom thanks to this huge gap between the island you teleport to and the mainland. If we were able to get to the other side, we'd be able to collect any of those 43 available moons in Day Metro, make our way to Night Metro, and deposit those moons into the Odyssey. And lucky for us, the Mario Odyssey community found an absolutely absurd looking glitch to get us to the mainland. I'm going to be referencing the Super Mario Odyssey wiki for this, so if you want a more in-depth description of this glitch, you can go check them out. But the glitch we're going to be using here is called a CRC, which is short for a Cappy Return Cancel, so let me give you a small rundown. You see, when you're playing Mario Odyssey in 2-player mode, not only can you move Mario and Cappy independently, but you could also return Cappy back to you at any time by hitting either X or Y. People found a way to abuse that though, because in the case that Cappy doesn't return in about 3/4 of a second, the game just automatically teleports Cappy right on top of Mario. But there's another part to that. If X or Y is pressed again, within the same few frames Cappy is automatically teleporting on top of Mario, he goes to a completely different place. The location of this place can be visualized as a sphere coming out of Mario. As Cappy moves around, he forms this circle around Mario like this. Now imagine we're trying to return Cappy. When we press X or Y in the frames Cappy tries to teleport to Mario, instead of Cappy teleporting onto Mario's head, he actually teleports at where Mario's line of sight intersects the outer edge of this imaginary sphere. That right there is a CRC. Knowing this, people came up with a way to reach the checkpoint across this gap using this technique. By ground pounding Cappy 54 times into the abyss, we can expand this imaginary sphere by a lot. As you could imagine, this takes a long time to do, but once we do that, we get Mario on top of this scaffolding and perform a CRC to teleport Cappy approximately here. Now, that's not exactly where the checkpoint is, but because we already teleported Cappy once, a new sphere is created between Cappy and Mario, which we can now take advantage of. So by using one more CRC with this new sphere, lining up Mario's line of sight just right, we can get Cappy right on top of the checkpoint. Even though this is incredibly difficult and can take hours to perfect, people have managed to do this exact thing for the minimum capture speedrun of the game, letting them warp to the checkpoint and access Day Metro. Now that we're here, we can collect any 20 of the 43 pre-piece moons here in Day Metro. And once we do, we can go back through the painting, fly into Night Metro, deposit the moons into the Odyssey, and leave without facing the Mecha Wiggler. And so, thanks to the mess that is a CRC, the Mecha Wiggler boss fight can be skipped, leaving us with a new total of 13 required boss fights. The next few boss fights are pretty prominent in Mario Odyssey, those being Bowser in Cloud Kingdom and the Dragon in Ruined. For the Bowser fight, the entirety of Cloud Kingdom is basically dedicated to this fight. Even if we were able to access moons through some special techniques, it wouldn't contribute to anything because there's no minimum move requirement to leave the kingdom. In fact, if you try and put Cappy onto the Odyssey while you're in Cloud Kingdom, he doesn't let you do anything until you beat Bowser. This makes Bowser a required boss fight. But things are a little bit different in the Dragon boss fight in Ruined Kingdom. Unlike Cap or Cloud Kingdom, there technically is a minimum moon requirement to leave Ruined Kingdom, this being 3 moons. But once you see the moon list for Ruined Kingdom, you'll understand why you can't leave. In the entirety of Ruined Kingdom, there's 10 total moons. 12 moons if you want to count the multi-moon as 3 different moons. And out of all of those moons, we can get a grand total of, drumroll please, 1 of those moons before we actually do the boss fight. Yeah. That moon ends up being in the ancient treasure chest, which is hidden behind the bridge that you go to right at the very beginning. And because we only have 1 of the 3 moons that we need to leave the kingdom, that means that the only other way we can leave is by doing the dragon boss fight, collecting the multi-moon once we defeat it, and then leaving the kingdom, making the dragon boss fight here in Ruins also a required boss fight. But the next few fights are pretty interesting cases, those being Harriet and Topper in Bowser's Kingdom. After going through a good portion of Bowser's Kingdom, you come across these 2 boss fights as a sort of mini gauntlet. Before you do the fights, a large door is left closed and there's a huge gap that separates Mario from the rest of the kingdom. And so of course, the way that you're intending to progress through the rest of the kingdom is by going through the 2 boss fights. Once you do, a bridge appears to let Mario go across the gap, and the big Bowser door opens to let Mario make his way through the rest of the level. But what's important here is that there's no order in how you have to fight these bosses. All you have to do is fight both of them. And so the only way we can go about this is either skipping both of these boss fights or skipping none of the boss fights. Again, all the boss fights really do is give us a bridge to get across the gap and open a door to gain access to the rest of the kingdom. So if we were able to do that ourselves and find a way to 1. Go across the massive gap in between the platforms, and 2. Get over the wall, we would, in theory, be able to access the rest of the kingdom without having to fight Harriet or Topper, so let's see what we can do. For getting across the gap in between the platforms, this should actually be pretty simple. Unlike Metro Kingdom, which had a massive gap in between the island and the mainland, this gap isn't that far out. In fact, the Mario Odyssey trick jumping community has recognized this jump for a while now, with the jump across this gap being named Shingle Leap, a surprisingly easy jump, only being a 5 out of 10. All Mario has to do is perform a triple throw and a triple jump off of this part of the platform outside of the main boss area, and then follow it with a rainbow spin, a cap bounce, and some minor vectoring. If you do it correctly, Mario's across the gap, meaning that 1/2 of our requirements are complete. Now we go on to number 2, getting over the wall. And strangely, that part seems to be easy enough too. Now if you tried getting over the door head on, that might be a bit of a task. But if we shift our view a little bit to the left, you'll notice that there's a very strangely made wall right next to where we land for our trick jump. So after doing Shingle Leap, all we'd have to do is some basic platforming to get to the top and make it over the wall. And so that's it. We have a method to get across the gap and access the rest of the kingdom, which makes it look like we can skip the Harriet and Topper boss fights. All we have to do now is try it out. To start, I'll do Shingle Leap to get across the gap. Now, before you say anything, I know I'm not the best trick jumper, but I didn't miss this because I failed the attempt. If I were to have barely missed it, Mario would have bonked on the edge of the rooftop and fell from there, but instead he continued to keep falling. I did a few more attempts of this, and no matter how good of an attempt I had, Mario just seemed to completely stop before he made it to the rooftop. This seemed really strange, so I did some digging by messing around with Mario Odyssey here, Nintendo I love you, please don't ban my account, and by giving myself infinite cap bounces, therefore infinite distance and height, I found that there's actually a massive invisible wall stopping Mario from reaching the other side of the kingdom. Come to find out, this trick jump is actually only possible once you defeat Harriet and Topper, which means that we can't use the Shingle Leap trick jump to make it to the other side. I tried looking online for more ideas and brainstorming other ways to get across, but it all came to an end after I found something else out. After using some more, let's call it investigative journalism, I love you Nintendo, please don't kill me, I hacked my way to the other side of the invisible wall and found something crazy. Even if you're able to get access to the other side of the invisible wall without fighting the bosses, none of the other cutscenes or boss fights play in the kingdom. It actually looks kind of funny, because that means when you get to the top of the tower for the mech fight later on, you could just jump around with Bowser just standing there. But without fighting the bosses, there's no way to progress. If this were any other kingdom, we might have found some way to glitch our way to other moons. But Bowser's Kingdom is one of the kingdoms in the game that doesn't have a minimum moon requirement for us to take advantage of. The only way to get through Bowser's Kingdom is to defeat the 2 boss fights, get the bridge to appear, open the doors, and make your way across, which means that Harriet and Topper are also required boss fights. Unfortunately, with that explanation as well, it shouldn't come as a surprise that the mech fight is also a required boss fight, meaning that the last 5 boss fights we've talked about are all required boss fights. Again, with no minimum moon requirement to leave the kingdom, it doesn't matter how many moons you find while you're going through Bowser's Kingdom the first time around, since it won't do anything to the Odyssey. In fact, if you try to go to the Odyssey before you beat the mech fight, Cappy will once again stop you from leaving the kingdom until you beat it. And so for that reason, the mech fight is a required boss fight. But our next fight is pretty notorious for being skipped actually, that being the Madame Brutal fight in Moon Kingdom. The reason I'd label it notorious is because if you've been keeping up with the speedrunning side of Mario Odyssey, you might not even realize that there actually is a Madame Brutal fight in Moon Kingdom. You see, to go through Moon Kingdom in a normal playthrough, you need to get to the top of this giant cliff and get to the big castle at the end of it. And the way you're supposed to get to the top is by going through this big scary archway at the side of it, which leads you to everyone's favorite sub-area, the Moon Cave sub-area. It's a big gauntlet of platforming challenges, and once you get to the end, you fight the one and only Madame Brutal. After defeating her, you go through the door at the end of the arena and pop right out on the top of the cliffside, which lets you progress through the rest of Moon Kingdom. Now, again, going through the Moon Cave is the way you're supposed to get to the top of the cliffside, but speedrunners found a way to skip the entire sub-area within days of Mario Odyssey's release, with a technique fittingly called Moon Cave Skip. If you pass the entrance to the Moon Cave and walk to the backside of the cliffside, you'll find a hidden away corner with a sphinx, which is what we take advantage of. Because believe it or not, there is a way to make it to the top of the cliffside from this corner without using glitches. Thanks to the zero gravity found in Moon Kingdom, Mario gets tons of height while jumping around compared to what he gets in other kingdoms. And by ground pounding on top of the sphinx here in the corner, cat bouncing, while jumping, and diving towards the top, you'll notice that we already get really close to the top of the cliffside without any special techniques. We just need a little bit more height to get to the very top. And that's where the Moon Cave Skip technique comes in. Again, we ground pound up the sphinx, cat bounce, and instead of just wall jumping anywhere, we get Mario to wall jump off of this section of the wall right here, where you could see a sort of L-shaped indent on the wall. If we wall jump off of here and drift as far left as possible, Mario will start sliding on the second wall, which means that we can wall jump off of it as well. And by using this second wall jump, we can easily drift Mario to the other side and successfully land at the exit of the Moon Cave. Now, why this works? Well, people don't really seem to have a very good idea online, so I have no idea. But from here, nothing's stopping us from just going to the castle like normal, which means that we successfully skip the Moon Cave and Madame Brutal, bringing the total down to 12 required boss fights. Oh, and would you look at that, the next fight is the Bowser fight in Moon Kingdom. Let's make this quick, why don't we? This fight is required. Bowser in Moon Kingdom is the fight to get back Princess Peach basically, and going through the fight is the only way to progress and get access to not only the last few cutscenes where Mario and Bowser get brutally rejected by Peach, but also access to the credit scene, which is literally the end of the game. So if you want to get to the end of the game, the final boss fight is obviously going to be a required boss fight. But while that is the last boss fight in the main game, I wanted to talk about all of the boss fights in Mario Odyssey, so I'm including in here the boss rush in Dark Side, featuring all of the Brutals, Topper, Harriet, Rango, Spewer, and the Mech, not forgetting a single Brutal whatsoever. It's 5 boss fights in a row, and if you die at any of them, you have to start from the very beginning all over again. That's the way Nintendo designed this level to be, and at a glance, there's no obvious way to skip any of these boss fights. The only thing that we have is a massive pool of poison below each of the boss arenas, which I guess was supposed to be a small detail to make the arenas look a little bit more intimidating. But when it comes to speedrunning, people go to the extremes to be able to save as much time as possible. And in Dark Side runs of the game, people found out that it's faster to not fight the boss fights and instead do this. This trick, involving some insane rainbow spins, down throws, and dive cancels, can be used to maneuver Mario around the boss fight trigger zones in 3 of the 5 main boss fight floors in Dark Side, which is why it's given the name 3DSS, or 3 Dark Side skips. Specifically, Topper, Rango, and Spewer can be skipped, leaving Harriet and the mech fights left. The mech fight is obviously not included here because the floor looks wildly different than the rest of the boss fights, taking place outside of the building instead of inside of it, so you obviously can't perform the trick here. But you might be asking why the Harriet boss fight can't be skipped. After all, the room looks identical to the other rooms. Well, even though you can use the technique to make your way to the other side of the arena, the developers for whatever reason included an extra boss trigger zone at the exit door of the Harriet room. So even if you use the 3DSS technique down to a T, you'll have no luck exiting the room without having to fight Harriet. And so, because of those reasons, speedrunners today still opt to fight the Harriet and mech fights as normal, leaving them with 2 out of the 5 boss fights in Dark Side left. But what if I told you it gets even crazier than that? What if I told you we can skip 1 more boss fight? Now, this might be a little bit hard to believe, since the literal world record Dark Side run still uses 3DSS as of this video's release. But something that's yet to be really found by almost anyone is a technique that is again performed by using everyone's favorite mode, the 2-player mode. And unless you're one of the insane glitch hunters at the low% SMO Discord, you probably have no idea what I'm about to show you, because it's a technique that's even more difficult, even faster, and skips 1 more boss fight. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to 4DSS. And once you're at the mech, you can go ahead and just fight it like normal, cause after defeating it, you get the same multi-moon and king outfit as you would beating Darkseid normally. Now, whether or not people will grind out 4DSS to see it in world records will be a mystery, but using 4DSS, you can technically skip 4 out of the 5 total fights in Darkseid, leaving just the mech fight left. And so, since that was the last boss fight in our list, we have our total of required boss fights once and for all. After doing all of the research and going through all of the individual boss fights, we find out that to beat all of Mario Odyssey, you only have to fight a grand total of 8 total boss fights. If you made it till the end of the video and want to see more like this, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. I'm a team of 1 doing research, getting footage, writing scripts, editing, and doing voiceovers, so any kind of support would be really appreciated. I also wanted to take this time to thank everyone for 12,000 subscribers. I genuinely can't believe that I'm starting 2026 with such cool fans, and I assure you, I do the very best to make sure my content is the best that it can be. And if you enjoyed this video, you might consider checking out these videos on your screen right here. Who knows, maybe you'll find something interesting. But anyways, I love you all, have a good one.